Hey there, everybody. This is James McBride, and we got Marcus Moyer, and it's just the two of us today. And hope you're having a good day, a good week. And Marcus, take it away. There's no one host here. We're co-hosting this thing equally. So, what's going on in your life?
Uh, Busy as always. Um, Retired from the Marine Corps, but I've found myself busier in retirement than I ever was when I was on active duty. I don't know how I had time to have a full-time job before I had this full-time job.
I know it's kind of like a false sense of security. We think we have it. We're so busy. It was busy, but at the same time, your
Yeah,
schedule's kind of set for you. Long days, unpredictable days at times, but at least it was a set schedule. Whereas when you're in semi-retired life, you have to kind of make your own schedule. And sometimes, like in our case, we kind of bit off more than we could chew sometimes.
yeah. I don't leave a lot of white space on my calendar, unfortunately. It's a bad habit, I suppose. I mean, I thoroughly enjoyed, my 20 plus years in the Marine Corps. Glad I did it. I'd do it again. But I'm really enjoying this side of things, where you're able to be a little more involved in things that when you were in uniform, you were restricted from doing. You couldn't be active in politics. You had to be very reserved in what you said in public, and so I'm enjoying the freedom to be a little bit more free in expressing my views and my opinions and being more politically active here in Prince William County.
Yeah, I'm very happy, and I was chomping at the bit for your retirement date to happen once you decided to retire, knowing that you were going to jump into all that and make an impact out there. So I'm very glad you did, and trying to do the same thing here in my end, and um, just recognize how important it is to get our voices out there and encourage others to get their voice out there in a
Yeah, I was
productive and
I was super stoked when
helpful
you
way.
retired, and then not very long afterward, you were elected to the town council there in Charleston, and that's exactly what we need. We need people like you on every city council in every city in the country.
I appreciate it. We'll see if the voters agree with you in a couple of years, but yeah, I appreciate that. Working my butt off, trying to make it better. Um, Government is inefficient, as we know, and all we can do is try to make it a little more efficient, little by little.
Yep. Well, I see your posts online. I track you down on social media, and I see all the things you're doing in your community, the work you're doing, and I know the people there appreciate it. Even here in Virginia, I can see that. I hear what your
That's awesome.
constituents say on social media, so you're doing a fine job.
Because I block the bad ones. I'm kidding. I don't block anybody. I don't. I haven't blocked anybody. I think we're not supposed to technically legally block anybody. I appreciate that. Yeah, so we were just kind of brainstorming what we're going to talk about today. This is episode 11, by the way. Fire for Effect. Been doing this for a little over 2 months, which is kind of cool. And by the way, John Jones might join us midstream. We're not sure. We had to start a little bit early, so we'll see if he can join us. But you know, Marcus and I, we've just been we met working in the Pentagon through a mutual friend of ours who when Marcus and I were still active duty. Mutual friend of ours was a former Marine, former AH-1 Cobra pilot that put us together. And it was he knew what he was doing because we're very like-minded folks, Marcus and I. And we wrestle with being veterans. Um, and I think one of the reasons that veterans obviously should be obvious are known to be more patriotic is simply for me simply because I was patriotic going in before I went in the Marine Corps, kind of sort of. Reagan inspired me, but once you're in the service, and especially during a time of war, which the last 20 plus years and war and terror has been a time of war, not declared war, but conflict. If you're in any level of service, you join not knowing where you're going to end up, what job you're going to do, but you watching on CNN and Fox News all this carnage happening and mayhem and U.S. soldiers getting shot at and killed and blown up, and you may put your life in the line. And so I think it causes a lot of veterans to think, what am I putting my life in the line for? Why am I doing this? Why would I care to do this? Well, it's for my country. Okay. Well, why do I care about my country? Is it just because my family lives here? That's, I'm sure, a part of it. It should be a part of it. But it's something about what America stands for. And a lot of us, I think you're typical teenager, typical, not all of them, but, including myself, don't really think I'll put a lot of thought into, the Constitution, Declaration of Independence, all these things. But again, once you get in the service, that becomes a higher priority topic because that's what we're defending. In fact, we swear an oath to support and defend, potentially with our lives, the Constitution of the United States. So we study the Constitution here and there while we're in the service, sometimes formally in groups of other Marines. Sometimes I remember several over my 25-year career, a handful of times, some staff and CO would just bring the Marines together and teach them something about the Constitution or the Declaration of Independence. And there's a reason for that, because that's we swear an oath to support and defend it. And for me, during the 2020 time frame, and so partly because of that, and because of it being inspired by Reagan, I've been a big fan of the founding fathers. And remember, Marcus, about in the 90s, late 90s, there was a slew of books that were coming out, very patriotic books, like Founding Brothers, 1776, and they're very popular books, and they're talking about the founding generation and the founding fathers and the founding values, and there was no controversy. It was great. Americans loved the books. They're well written. You could sling off a whole bunch of them. I'm sure you've read. And then something happened in 2020 with a combination of the tragic death of George Floyd, and COVID, and just the combination of just what became kind of a dystopian period in recent American history that really threw a lot of turmoil into what America is. And you and I were in the Pentagon at that time. And I was in the Pentagon for 2 years. The first year was under the first Trump administration. Second year was under the Biden administration. And there was a clear difference in tone and leadership style from the commander-in-chief on down. It made the two kind of philosophies starkly evident and different. Whereas I would argue probably, back in, from George H.W. Bush to Clinton, there probably wasn't that big of a feeling of a difference in the Pentagon at the time. But this was a stark difference, and it illustrated a stark difference in philosophies of what America is. So it caused me to really wrestle with, okay, I've just kind of, been a big fan of the Constitution, founding values, et cetera, but hasn't ever really been challenged before. And now it's kind of being challenged. So I really dug down into what I believed and why I believed it. And first and foremost, I'm a Christian. And I know that, a lot of the founders were Christians, not all of them, but a huge majority. And you hear this term deist thrown around, and that's kind of in a lot of cases, that's misapplied term. A lot of them were overt Christians, but they just had different ways of defining these terms back then. Either way, the faith was a big part of a lot of the founders, and what infused their beliefs into led to the Constitution. But to me, the Declaration of Independence is the bed from which the Constitution sprung forth, and it's not even conjecture. To me, it's evident. Like, we were set apart as a nation, starting with the Declaration of Independence, written down by Thomas Jefferson. But after doing research, he did multiple drafts, got input from several of the founders from the different provinces or states, what became states, because they had a pact that they would not all sign on to a Declaration of Independence unless they all could agree to it, and it was unanimous because they knew as soon as they did it, they were putting their lives on the line and basically committing treason against the king of England. So that's why there's so many iterations, so many drafts. And by the way, an earlier draft of the Declaration, which you can find on pbs.org, Jefferson scourged the institution of slavery that England was kind of sort of imposing on America. Now, of course, there's open recipients to that in America. There was an open market, but a lot of that, the money generated from that was going back to England. So the King of England had a motivation to propel that industry. In an earlier draft of the Declaration of Independence, Jefferson actually had that institution of slavery basically abolished. It was Georgia and South Carolina wouldn't agree to that because they were so heavily dependent on that industry, unfortunately. So he took it out as a compromise, unfortunately. But knew there'd be a reckoning down the sometime in the near future, and that led to the Civil War, of course. Anyway, point being, I look at the Declaration of Independence, and okay, so I started to study. Okay, what do these words mean that we kind of flippantly say we hold these truths to be self-evident? All men are created equal, endowed by our Creator with certain unalienable rights. You know, as believers and as patriots and veterans, you know, we say these things and have our most of our adult lives without really having to think hard about it. So I really thought hard about it, and I recognized how much wisdom was put into those small number of words. And that became my bedrock that I could stand on no matter what was wavering as far as all these different philosophies and all these attacks on our Constitution, the Founding Fathers, and et cetera, et cetera. And that is because that phrase includes, basically starts with God. And that God created every human being. And that is what Jefferson meant, by the way. Despite him being hypocritical and owning slaves himself, he knew the institution was bad, it was evil, wanted it to go away. And he did mean every human being when he said that all men are created equal. Created by God. Equal, I add, equal in dignity in the eyes of God. Because from a biblical standpoint, all human beings are made in the image of God. So I had to say a lot of words to define just a couple words that he used, but that's why he was such a brilliant writer. And that became my bedrock that I knew I could stand on no matter what kind of what I'll just call woke ideology was thrown at us to kind of buttress what we believed and why we were defending the Constitution of the United States. I knew or feared that would be challenged while I was in the Pentagon, and I needed to have an answer for it. So that's what kind of drove me to that passionate belief in the Declaration.
That's really good. Your experience, though, was really different than mine. You were talking about how occasionally throughout your career, the staff NCOs would get you together for like those little hip pocket PMEs, and they would talk about the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence. I think that's great. I think that's what should happen. And of course, anybody who's been in the military knows that every year there's a long list of things that you have to do and read and train to. There's all kinds of online training you have to take, tobacco cessation training every year. All of your, the term is escaping me, but it's your computer-based training, CBT type stuff, human trafficking awareness, all kinds of things. And then there's reading initials for your squadron or your unit, all the policies and things that you have to read. And I found it striking that in my entire 20 years, I mean, even though everybody starts their military career by raising their hand and swearing to support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic, not one time in my 20 years in the Marine Corps did anybody ever tell me I had to read it. It was never required. We never had any formal training on it. I would argue the most important document to us, the one that we've sworn to give our lives to protect, not one time did anybody tell me you should read that or you have to read that. They told me I had to read it. I was forced to read a lot of other things, but never that. I made it my own personal goal to read through both the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution at least once a year. And I would generally read it more often than that, because you're right. It is a North Star. It's a guiding light. It's a set of principles, and it was intended to be so. Principles that you could guide not only a nation but a life by. And because it was so heavily influenced by the Bible, it's a safe way of navigating as well. And as you pointed out, there's a lot of accusations of hypocrisy that is aimed and leveled at our founding fathers, because they said one thing in this document, and then it seems like many of them lived counter to that. And I understand that accusation, and there's a little bit of truth to it. But who was it that said it's dangerous to judge the past through the modern lens without having a real understanding of the political and the social environment of the time? As you mentioned, the first draft of the Declaration of Independence that Jefferson penned had an entire section now known as the Lost Passage, and it's rightly so, because I would venture to say the vast, vast majority of Americans are not aware that it ever existed, much less what it said. And it's a scathing rebuke of the institution of slavery and King George III, who was essentially forcing it on the American colonies, many of which had tried to pass anti-slavery laws, and every one of them had been vetoed by the king. That was part of the complaint of the colonies, is that we're not being allowed to govern ourselves, and everything we're trying to do here 3,000 miles away, a sovereign on the other side of the ocean is telling us we can't. He's shooting down all of these things that we're trying to do. And Jefferson, as you mentioned again, was not the only person. There was a 5-man committee that was supposed to create that first draft. And in typical fashion, any group project, one person, the smartest guy, is usually the one that has to do all the work. And Jefferson ended up doing most of the writing. And interestingly enough, one of the gentlemen that was on that committee, Livingston, founding father Livingston, he didn't agree with a lot of what went into that draft. Just another data point that not all of the founding fathers were, bosom buddies and saw eye to eye on everything. But what they created was incredible. And for those who don't know, Jim McBride, in addition to being an aviator, a Marine veteran, city council member, he is also a prolific writer, and a very good one. And this idea of returning to first principles and advocating for them, he wrote a very, very good article that I don't know that he's even published yet. He should, called Exhuming Publius. And for those who don't know who Publius is, back when the Constitution was being heavily debated before ratification, there was a series of anonymous articles that were published advocating, trying to convince the states to ratify the Constitution, and it was penned under the name of Publius. And it turned out there were 3 of our founding fathers who were behind that, but they were making a case for the Constitution. And so Jim's article, Exhuming Publius, is a rallying cry to do the same thing. We need people who understand and appreciate and value and see the value in the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence to advocate for it. And it's not as easy as it used to be. As Jim also pointed out earlier, there was a time there where patriotism was popular, and it's become much less so in recent years. And I think maybe we've turned a corner and we're coming back to that. I hope we are. The thing that I think we have to address, anybody who wants to take on this job and exhume Publius and join that effort, the challenge that we have is that first you have to understand, we have to understand, in order to make the case for it, What is it that the detractors don't like about it? And again, as Jim has already said, the Declaration of Independence is the why of America. Why does it even exist? Why did the founding fathers declare independence? Why did they fight a war? What were they upset about? What needed to be rectified? That's the why of America. And then the Constitution came years later, which is the what. It's how we bring about this thing that that the founding fathers created. How do we maintain it? And I think two reasons that people who take objection with the Constitution, and more specifically the Declaration of Independence, is because of its implications. And I think you can look at it from both the government side as well as the individual side. From the government side, the Declaration of Independence on its face is a challenge to political and government overreach. So, of course, governments would probably be a little bit prickly about that. It's a document that contains principles that allow the common people to challenge authority, gives them a right to do so. From the individual side, the rights that are laid out here in the Declaration of Independence are not just restrictions on government, but if I truly believe what the Declaration of Independence says about life and liberty, then it has implications for me as an individual on how I treat other people as well. Other people have rights. And I think that restrictive nature of the document is what causes the hackles on the back of governments and some people to stand up, because it is telling me what I can or can't do, or what I should or shouldn't do. And it goes to a deeper principle, a deeper conversation of where those rights come from. And of course, we know from the opening of the Declaration of Independence that the Founding Fathers says we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created. They don't evolve into equality. They're created equal with certain inalienable rights. They're endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, and among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So there's a couple of very powerful implications in that one sentence, that you are, one, you're created, you don't evolve. Two, you are endowed by the Creator with certain inalienable rights. And what is an inalienable right? And they had quite a bit to say about that. Constitution signer John Dickinson, famously the guy who disagreed with John Adams on a lot of things. And if you haven't watched the miniseries, the HBO miniseries, John Adams, incredible. You should do that. But anyway, that's beside the point. Constitution signer John Dickinson defined inalienable rights as rights which God gave you and which no inferior power has a right to take away. So governments obviously are going to take objection with being referred to as an inferior power. John Adams agreed. One of the things he and Dickinson agreed on, apparently, John Adams said rights are antecedent to all earthly governments, rights that cannot be repealed or restrained by human laws, rights derived from the great legislator of the universe. And then John Quincy Adams, John Adams' son, a future president, echoed that same sentiment, saying that inalienable rights are those given to man by his Creator, which can neither be taken from him by force nor transferred from him to anyone else. Hence, the rights derived are declared to be inalienable. So, from the outset, we're recognizing that there's a Creator. Our rights come from that Creator, and that has implications on how we should live and how governments should operate. And the human nature is such that we automatically rebel against anything like that. And then, of course, from the government's perspective, it goes even further when it says, not only do you have these inalienable rights, the entire purpose and point of government is to secure those rights. For this reason, governments are instituted among men and derive their just powers from the consent of the governed. Just powers and consent by the people And the government's job is to secure these rights, not to grant them. The right doesn't come from government. The government doesn't bestow the right. The government acknowledges and recognizes the inalienable right that already exists and then protects it. And of course, that gets into even a larger discussion that's been very hot now these days on immigration. Do immigrants have rights? Of course they do. Do illegal aliens have rights? Of course they do, because they are human beings and they are endowed by their creator with inalienable rights. That's not a question. The question, though, is who has the obligation to defend that person's rights. The government has an obligation to secure the rights of its people. And so while an illegal alien absolutely has all of the inalienable rights that a citizen of the United States does, it's not the United States government's job to protect that particular person's inalienable rights. It's not their government. That's my perspective anyway. But anyway, there's so much packed in to the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution, and it's largely lost on the majority of the population because we don't read it.
Yeah. Don't read it and don't understand it. Don't understand how the Declaration of Independence and the philosophies that he wrote led to freedom in a lot of huge cases around the world, including for women's suffrage in America. The groups behind that led to women being allowed to vote for the first time in America used that phrase that they said, all men and women are created equal, which is what Jefferson meant. I firmly believe that all mankind are created equal. And when the women's suffrage movement used that phrase, Martin Luther King referred to the Declaration of Independence in his at least one of his speeches. Frederick Douglass famously did as well. Both he and Martin Luther King saying that we're not living up to the ideals of the Declaration of Independence, which was so true, and we'll never fully will, but we should be striving towards that. And we have, as a nation. That's what's frustrating. It's like, as a nation, we have striven far closer to that ideal than just go back in time. And it's gotten progressively better as far as the government. I mean, progressively better with a sine wave, not a straight line. And I don't know where we are right now, but progressively better at seeing every individual as created equal in the eyes of God and treating them that way. And it's not just the government, though, that has to do that. Like you said, they're securing the rights of individuals, but the people have to do that. So that gets into the people. As you're talking, Marcus, something just kind of struck me, and I think I've thought of this before, but kind of forgot about it. Understandably, the founders were trying to break free from the shackles of King George in England and unfair taxation and control, etc. So they were thinking about government overreach at the time and focusing on individual rights and freedom, which is what they should have done, of course. And that's the focus of the Declaration and the Constitution. What's not mentioned in those documents is what goes with that, or should go with equal rights and liberty, is individual responsibility to live a moral, ethical, noble life. And as we quoted before what we quoted before in one of our other podcasts was John Adams' famous quote where he said, "We have no government armed in power capable of contending with human passions unbridled by morality and religion. Our Constitution was made only for a moral and religious people. It is wholly inadequate to the government of any other." So that's, again, not in an official document, but that should be included with individual rights and liberty and freedom, and government protecting those rights, because you don't want anarchy. Like, if everybody was, all right, I'm free in individual liberty and I believe in anarchy, then you have chaos. And you don't want that either. So it's definitely got to be a combination of the two. And John Locke does a great job, and we should probably talk about him at some time in the future, but really kind of tease out his philosophies from his two treatises of government, where he articulates the understanding of individual liberty and where that comes from, and then extends out to property rights, et cetera, et cetera. And how, your freedoms are, you should have the freedom to do what you want, up to the extent of, what's the phrase, Marcus, where, your the freedom to swing your arm ends at where your fist meets someone's face, or something like that. You have the freedom to do what you want, as long as you don't infringe on the freedoms of someone else. And that's easy to say flippantly, hard to execute in a lot of cases, but that's what debate is for, and that's what voting in and out elected officials are for, is to figure those gray areas out. There's something else I was going to say here. Let's see. John Adams, something else he said. I'll get to it later. But yeah, I just wanted to point out that, building back into our culture, the idea of a common sense of moral responsibility among individuals and among society as a whole. And I'm going to tee you up for this one. And that kind of leads, I think, to the phrase "e pluribus unum," because that is that other ingredient that kind of encapsulates, I think, that other ingredient that is not part of our founding documents overtly, but is critical, and which is why it became a national motto for the country. So you brought that up offline earlier. Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. So the founding fathers absolutely understood the importance of unity. And unity is not the same thing as uniformity. Uniformity is not necessarily a good thing. As Taylor George said in one of our previous episodes, if everybody is thinking the same thing, then somebody's not thinking. So we're not after uniformity, but we do need unity. And that is the opposite of diversity, as it's explained in the modern culture. And probably the oldest military tactic and strategy on record is divide and conquer. Divide and conquer. Division leads to defeat. But yet in our world, we have given division a slightly different name. We've called it diversity. And now we claim that as a virtue. And it's the opposite of what the founding fathers were after. Diversity says, out of one, many. We want factions. We want everybody divided up by race and gender and religion and any other label that we can put on people to further divide them. And as a matter of fact, in the Federalist Papers, there's a lot of time spent on expounding on the dangers of factions. And yet that seems to be the push nowadays. Create as many factions as possible because diversity is our strength, they say. The founding fathers believed the exact opposite. Out of many, one, which is what e pluribus unum means. And I think the record shows which of those works better.
Yeah. And I had done some research a while back to figure out where that came from. E pluribus unum was the motto proposed for the first Great Seal of the United States by John Adams, Benjamin Franklin, and Thomas Jefferson in 1776. A Latin phrase meaning one from many, the phrase offered a strong statement of the American determination to form a single nation from a collection of states. Over the years, e pluribus unum has also served as a reminder of America's bold attempt to make one unified nation of people from many different backgrounds and beliefs. The challenge of seeking unity while respecting diversity has played a critical role in shaping our history, our literature, and our national character. And that's the point. E pluribus unum doesn't mean you can't have different beliefs and you can't have different backgrounds and everything else. That's besides the point. Please have those different beliefs and different backgrounds. However, the one thing we should expect people to unite around is the idea of unity for the country, because that does make the country strong. And that unity can be centered around what, even if you're not a believer, if you're not a Christian, um, if you believe in the idea, like um, Thomas Paine did, who was an atheist for most of his life. I've read at the end of his life, he converted to Christianity. I'm not 100% positive that's true, but he believed and respected the idea of everyone uniting around the idea that they're created in the image of God, because that is unifying. It gives everybody a sense of worth and a purpose, which we all should have. Who wants to go around the world thinking that they're not put on here for a purpose? A lot of people do think that, and that's, to me, that's sad. Um, I want to believe, and I want, my son to believe, and everyone to believe that they're on earth for a purpose, for a good purpose. And it takes a lot of us, many decades of our life, to figure out what that purpose is. But the purpose is to do good, to contribute to society, to contribute to your family, to creating, to producing things that help society, and that all stems from the idea of being created in the image of God, to do good. That alone, that's very simple. It has nothing to do with, it doesn't get into the weeds of policy. That's the core foundation, I think, that can and should unite, and would and has united this country in the past. But we don't talk about that kind of thing, because it veers too close to religion, and we don't want to talk about religion in public schools and things like that. And hopefully that's that idea of not talking about that kind of thing in the public is dying a slow death. Seems like it is. Hope it's coming back, that we should talk about these things, because that is unifying. And I wanted to change course really quick, but if you want to add any other comments on that, I want to go back in a second and read actually that phrase from the earlier draft of the Declaration. I have it here. I want to actually read it because it's pretty powerful.
I'll add one thing that, well, first, as an aside, you talked about this motto, this national motto for the Great Seal. I believe it was on July 4th, the Declaration of Independence, when it came into existence. On the same day, on July 4th, the Congress established this commission to create a seal for the United States, and Jefferson and Adams both put forward an idea for it. And it was kind of striking how similar they were, and both of them harkened back to the story of Exodus, a biblical image that they had depicted that they thought would be appropriate as the seal of the United States, both of which focused on the Israelites being delivered from Egypt, out of the clutches of Pharaoh, a tyrant, and moving to the Promised Land. So again, biblical influence was strong on the founders, even those who nowadays are accused of being deist or being very irreligious. Jefferson being one of those. His proposal for the Great Seal was straight out of the Bible. The idea of unity that you were talking about, yes, diverse people with diverse backgrounds can still be unified, and that's what we're after. We're not trying to. It's not the goal to completely divest every person in America of any prior heritage they may have, but we do have to be united around what? And we unite around a common set of principles, which are outlined here in the Declaration of Independence and in the Constitution. And if we can't unite around those things, then we don't have a country. And, I think it's actually on the base of the Statue of Liberty, or maybe it was in the speech, the dedication. I don't remember, but basically it was saying anybody who comes to this country and will support it is welcome. But if you come here to break our laws and to cause havoc, then no. So it was a plea for unity. And one of the things that really had worried me over the last 5 years or so, as you and I were discussing this change in mentality that seemed to have started to happen around 2020 timeframe, that I felt that for most of history, Americans they were united around what they believed the vision for America should be, what its goal should be. We just disagreed how to get there. But what I started to see happen around 2020 was two different visions for America. Not just the disagreement on the means, but a disagreement on the what. And of course, that's a dangerous place to be when you have a nation that's divided in that way. We've seen it at least once before in our own history, and it didn't end well. I guess you could say it did end well, but not without a lot of death and heartache and grief and pain that is still felt to this day. But anyway, back over to you for a recitation of the lost passage from Jefferson.
Yeah. No, you summarized that well. It's and I'm hopeful that we're starting to talk about these things again publicly, and hopefully can reinstill these values into our lexicon. So I found this at pbs.org. If you were to Google rough draft of the Declaration of Independence and PBS, you should find it. Trying to see what the date of this version is. I don't see the date of it, but it's one of his earlier drafts. And if you're familiar with the Declaration of Independence, he starts out with when in the course of human events it becomes necessary for people to advance from et cetera, and then it goes into the famous, infamous lines of "We hold these truths to be self-evident." He added a few more words in this earlier version. He says, "We hold these truths to be sacred and undeniable, self-evident," which is interesting. That all men are created equal and independent. That's added as well, equal and independent. And he goes on from there. Similar again, just some extra words added to the famous phrase. And if the Declaration of Independence, as we know it today, then goes into a whole list of grievances against the King of England, King George, right? The third, if I'm not mistaken. And in this version, he lists a whole bunch of grievances, and then most of these grievances are, for example, he has plundered our seas, ravaged our coasts, burnt our towns. He has abdicated government here, withdrawing his governors. Just a list of grievances like that. I'd say about 15 or 20, one or two sentences long. The last grievance is the longest, and I'm going to read it because it's Thomas Jefferson, and he's a great writer. This is the last grievance that was, again, edited out of the final version of the Declaration of Independence. He said, "He has waged cruel war against human nature itself, violating its most sacred rights of life and liberty in the persons of a distant people who never offended him, captivating and carrying them into slavery in another hemisphere, or to incur miserable death in their transportation hither. This piratical warfare," I think, like from the word pirate, piratical warfare, the opprobrium of infidel powers, is the warfare of the Christian King of Great Britain, determined to keep open market where men should be bought and sold. He has prostituted his negative for suppressing every legislative attempt to prohibit or to restrain this execrable commerce, determining to keep open a market where men should be bought and sold, and that this assemblage of horrors might want no fact of distinguished die. He is now exciting those very people to rise in arms among us and to purchase that liberty of which he had deprived them by murdering the people upon whom he also obtruded them. thus paying off former crimes committed against the liberties of one people with crimes which he urges them to commit against the lives of another. That's the paragraph. So that whole paragraph, he is completely just excoriating the King of England for the whole institution of slavery. That yes, a small portion of America did get addicted to, unfortunately. But Jefferson is just excoriating the whole institution of it. And what's interesting, if you go and look at this document, this version that I'm looking at on pbs.org, the only words that Jefferson writes in all capital letters are the word is the word men, men, and it's only in this paragraph referring to the slaves. So he's stressing, without at the time having italics and underlines and all these things, he's stressing with all caps, calling them men, capital letters, stressing that these are men. To me, implying created in the image of God, men equal to any other man, that the King of England was purposely, capturing, enslaving, and sending to America, again, to exploit them and exploit the goods of America by using these slaves in the farms and that kind of stuff. So that is not taught very often in our schools, I don't believe. And again, it doesn't absolve Jefferson from his hypocrisy, from his sins. It just points out the fact that at the very beginning of the founding of our country, it was recognized that this institution was evil. And it was one of the motivations that Jefferson was, in an earlier draft, using to break away from England. In another correspondence, he talked about ending the institution of slavery, and so did many of the other founding fathers. And some of the founding fathers were outright abolitionists from the get-go. John Quincy Adams being one of them. So, just wanted to say that because it's a fact that's not out there very much.
No, thank you for saying that. And you said from the beginning they recognized that slavery was wrong. How did they know that? What was their source? What was their basis for saying slavery is wrong? Well, it's the Bible, as with most of the things they believed. It came from a study of Scripture, and it wasn't lost on the slaves either that it was wrong, and that this is very hypocritical for a Christian nation to be involved in slavery. And the Christian nation at the time that was imposing this and enforcing it was Great Britain. And as you just pointed out, one of the objections that the colonies had was forced participation in an open market where men are bought and sold as being execrable commerce. That's a hard word to say. When Congress did finally end slavery nationally, Congress invited Reverend Henry Garnett to come and preach a sermon. Well, when's the last time Congress asked a preacher to come preach a sermon to them? But anyway, Reverend Garnett reminded them of this biblical law that we've been violating for so long. And in his sermon, Reverend Garnett said this. He said, Moses, hearkening back to Scripture, the greatest of all lawgivers and legislators, said, while his face was yet radiant with the light of Sinai, whoso stealeth a man and selleth him, or if he be found in his hand, he shall surely be put to death. That was the original law. And then, of course, very eloquent sermon that was preached by Garnett. He ended his sermon saying, let the verdict of death which has been brought in against slavery by the 38th Congress be affirmed and executed by the people. Let the gigantic monster perish. Yes, perish now and perish forever. Let slavery die. It has had a long and fair trial. God himself has pleaded against it. Its death warrant is signed by God and man. Do not commute its sentence. Give it no respite, but let it be ignominiously executed, put to death with shame and horror. Honorable senators and representatives, illustrious rulers of this great nation, I cannot refrain this day from invoking upon you, in God's name, the blessings of millions who were ready to perish, but to whom a new and better life has been opened by your humanity, justice, and patriotism. You have said, let the Constitution of the country be so amended that slavery and involuntary servitude shall no longer exist in the United States except in punishment for a crime. Surely an act so sublime could not escape divine notice, and doubtless the deed has been recorded in the archives of heaven. Favored men and honored of God as his instruments, speedily finish the work which he has given you to do. Emancipate, enfranchise, educate, and give the blessings of the gospel to every American citizen.
That's awesome. That's a great quote.
And I think, again, going back to why do people have objections to the Declaration of Independence? And I think it's the implication of this creator from the outset, right? Not only did the founders specifically refer to the creator and the rights that the creator endows, the whole justification that the founders claimed for being able to do this. They appealed to heaven. They appealed to the laws of nature and nature's God. And I think a lot of people resist that because the implications of there being a God, that has some very direct ramifications for me personally. If there is a God, that means I will have to answer to him someday. And that means he probably has a set of moral laws that I have to follow. And of course, in our modern times, people are very resistant to anything that would restrict them from doing whatever they want to do, from being whatever they view themselves to be. And the wording in that section of the Declaration of Independence is very deliberate. Laws of nature and of nature's God. The laws of nature are not the same thing as natural law. And I didn't fully understand this until I read an article in the Founder's Bible, which I believe you have a copy of. The title of this particular article is about the Declaration of Independence, and it's called A Heavenly Birthright. And they point out this distinction between the laws of nature and natural law. The article says that the Declaration is America's birth certificate, but it's much more than that. It's a petition to God for a miracle birth, backed up first by an appeal to the opinions of mankind in the court of public opinion, and lastly by an appeal to the supreme judge of the world in the court of heaven. And it's bedrocked in Christian principles. The laws of nature were widely understood as the will of God revealed in nature. And in 1763, in his commentaries on the laws of England, Sir William Blackstone, known as I think pretty much the founder of common law, preeminent English legal scholar of his day, traced this law of nature to the Genesis account. The Genesis account of the origin of the world and mankind, saying that when the Supreme Being formed the universe and created matter out of nothing, he impressed certain principles upon that matter from which it can never depart, and without which it would cease to be. And today's world encourages people to resist the laws of nature. The laws of nature are not immutable, and you can act contrary to the laws of nature with no consequences, is what we're told. You can change the law of nature, is what we're arrogant and prideful enough to think that we can do that. This law of nature, Blackstone continued, dictated by God himself, is superior in obligation to any other. The law of nature is confirmed by Holy Scriptures in such passages as Psalm 19 and Romans 1. But Blackstone drew a sharp line between natural law and the law of nature. The law of nature, he wrote, is expressly declared so to be, the law of nature is expressly declared so to be by God himself. In contrast, natural law is only what, by the assistance of reason, we might imagine that law to be. And by choosing to rest America's case for independence on the laws of nature, our founders deliberately chose to stake their claim on the law that is actually revealed by God, not as understood by men. And for good reason, because like Blackstone, they believed that although God had given mankind the faculty to reason and discover the laws of nature, man's reason was corrupt and his understanding full of ignorance and error. And so that's the importance of first principles, things that do not change. We talked about that in a previous episode as well. Because we as humans, we're often so sure of ourselves, and yet we're so wrong. And the older I get and the more I study, the more I learn, the less confident I become in what I think, because I realize how much there is that I don't know. And that's the danger of establishing our own personal code of conduct, much less that of a nation, on our own reasoning. And it was Arthur Clarke who said something similar. He said, "We live in a world where half of the things that a man knows at 20 are no longer true at 40. And half of the things he knows at 40 hadn't been discovered when he was 20. And so our view of science, our view of what we believe to be irrevocably true, inevitably changes. And that's a dangerous way to run a country or a life."
Yeah, and again, I think is one of many reasons why respectful, open debate in the public square is so important. And again, respectful is the key. We can't enforce that necessarily, but it helps because a well-reasoned argument done repeatedly usually leads to the truth winning the argument, because the truth ultimately wins. But if you shut down or suppress any of that speech because it sounds offensive or whatever, then you're not letting truth come forth. Now, in free and open debate, there's going to be all kinds of untruths, of course. But if you don't have those debates, then the people that believe the untruths aren't going to be able to be challenged. And the people that have true beliefs don't, as I mentioned last week, steel man their arguments to really know how their argument stands up under fire, so that it gets more refined, more precise, more articulate. So anyway, we can both go on and on about the importance of free, respectful debates and why it needs to be protected and preserved, which is why it's in our First Amendment. I do want to take a quick segue, and I got about 5 or so minutes left, to the point of, you mentioned a couple times, and you're 100% right. This generation of, the Gen Z generation, and we've talked about in previous podcasts how a huge swath of the Gen Z, especially the males, are becoming more conservative, more faith believing group of people. But by and large, Gen Z is very disillusioned. And what's before Gen Z? Gen Y, I think, the Y generation. Very disillusioned for practical reasons. And Charlie Kirk was starting to talk about this before he died a lot. The reality is that, again, starting with the 2020 dystopia, I love that term, because that's what it was. It led to policy decisions, government policy decisions. We've talked already about, the COVID lockdowns and kind of the draconian, shoot from the hip decisions that were made nationwide that were a whole lot of mistakes made. But also, there was 2 huge bills passed by under the Biden administration. I forget the name of one of them. One of them was like a COVID relief fund or something, or act. One of them was the Inflation Reduction Act, which infused billions and billions, if not, maybe trillions, I don't know, but billions and billions of dollars of government printed money into the economy, which did everything but reduce inflation. It skyrocketed, matching and exceeding, in some cases, the inflation skyrockets under the Jimmy Carter administration. So the rate of inflation increased, and I don't have the numbers in front of me, but I do remember it was 40-year highs, 4 decades since inflation has been as bad as it was 2 years ago under the Biden administration. And the thing about inflation, the rate's gone down, and it started to go down in the last year of his administration, and that's great. But when the rate of inflation is high, it makes the cost of everything super expensive. Even when the rate comes down, the costs are still up there. The costs don't come down. They're permanently up there. And we're still suffering through that. And the young generation is suffering through that. You and I are blessed to have a career in the military and have a pension and some money saved up to be able to survive that. But the young generation can't afford a home, can barely afford to rent a home. They're much more likely to be forced to have to work two jobs if they're single, or mother and father having to work two or three or four jobs between them just to get by. So when you talk to that group of young people and you try to tell them, hey, America was founded on freedom of liberty and rights and rights and free speech, and you're all created in God. When you're under that much pressure and suffering that much because of decisions made by the government, it's understandable why there's a lot of disillusionment in government, and it can also cause that generation to just discard what came before, discard the values that founded our country, made it strong. And that's something we also have to admit. It's not because of those values that made America strong. It's because we operated and passed policies to go against those values. But it's hard to articulate that and parse that out and make that clear to this generation that is just suffering immeasurably. And not only them, and the only way to combat that, by the way, is for wages to gradually increase to make up for the inflation, which is slowly starting to happen, but it takes a long time. But for those who don't have a job or go into minimum wage jobs, they suffer the worst and the longest, because if you have no income or minimum wage income, the average wage is increasing on the upper end doesn't affect you at all. And so everything is more expensive and your wages are zero or minimum wage. And that it's just so hard to overcome that. And it's debilitating. I just can't imagine what that generation is going through. And we don't really ever talk about it. It's mind boggling. And now last thing I'll say, and I'll turn over to you, then we'll close it out, is, the debt, the debt, and the interest on the debt that we're paying is slowly, actually kind of rapidly, starting to crowd out all of our discretionary spending. That's going to become a crisis if we don't start turning that around really soon. And our country's whole financial system could fall apart.
That's very well said. And something that I learned within the last month or so, actually listening to Charlie Kirk. I forget who he was talking to, but he said anybody who is interested in economics and helping this younger generation, which, as you described, is suffering in this economic environment. He said there's 4 letters that they need to know: BNPL. And I had never heard of that, but it stands for buy now and pay later. And apparently there are some pretty predatory lending practices out there that are preying on this younger generation who is struggling to afford even the basic necessities. And Charlie was saying that under this construct, you can actually finance a pizza. You can split a pizza payment into 4 installments. And of course, it comes with interest rates and things like that. But what are we doing when you can't afford to buy a pizza? And we've done a tremendous disservice to this younger generation. And it's not hard to see why they would be disillusioned. And while I wholeheartedly agree with what Charlie was trying to, the movement he was trying to spark of get married, have more kids than you can afford, as he would like to say, pass down your values to your kids. That is a wonderful vision, but it's a difficult one to realize for young people in this environment. When you can't buy a pizza, how are you going to support a family? Right? And everything you said is exactly right. And we have to somehow convince them, and it's not a trick of persuasion either, it's the truth. It's difficult when you're in that situation, though, to be able to step back and look at a broader swath of history to figure out how we got here. What was it that caused this? It wasn't the principles that are outlined in the Declaration of Independence and our Constitution. That's not what got us to this point. America thrived under that. So what happened, and when did it happen that caused this severe degradation that has now landed this generation at this low point? And as you had said before, not to throw the baby out with the bathwater. Let's correctly identify what has caused this and go after that, not throw out the founding principles that made us prosperous to begin with when we were actually honoring them. And as you said before, Clarence Thomas, I've heard say this, and I forget who else you said had said it, but at no point have the founding principles in our Declaration and Constitution failed us. There have been many instances throughout our history where we have failed to live up to those values and those principles, and we've paid a heavy price for those failures, as we are paying now. And this newest generation is paying now for a failure to live up to our values. But it's not the values that are the problem. It's their execution or the discarding of those values. And so I'm all for exhuming Publius, man. We've got to advocate for a return to these first principles to get the nation back on the right track. And we can do it.
Yeah, I appreciate the shout out on that and the challenge to get that article published. I'm going to do that hopefully within a week or so. I need to get that out there instead of just talking about it and never publishing it. And I'll give a shout out to Thomas Sowell. If you want to learn about basic economics and how economics should be done and should be executed on a individual all the way up to a federal level, government level, Thomas Sowell, brilliant, living, thank God. He's in his 90s now. The smartest living economist that we have.
National treasure, and therefore not allowed to die.
That's right. That's right. I got to wrap this up on a hard stop here. I got another meeting to go to, but Marcus has turned out to be an awesome discussion. This was kind of the least planned discussion or topic we had, but it very, very enlightening. Can't wait to go back and listen to it. Search for the quotes that you said, and maybe I'll try to put some links to all the quotes that we mentioned in here, so that people can find them easier. But I really appreciate your time and your wisdom.
Appreciate you, man. The feeling is mutual for sure.
All right. God bless. Until next week, and until we chat about what we talked about, I'll see you soon.
One thing though, before we go, for those who are listening, if this sparks something in your mind, please send us a note, drop us a comment, 5-star review on Spotify. That fuels the fire and adds to the effect. So we'd love for you to be part of the conversation.
Very well said. And share it with others too. Fan the flames. Fan the flames.
All right, brother.
God bless,
Appreciate
brother.
you.
Yeah, you too. Bye.